And if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel. And if you're a guest with us today, first of all, welcome. But I want to especially again wish a happy Mother's Day to all the moms. And it's interesting because I've been in this series, just 1 Corinthians. You know, we've been walking through 1 Corinthians, and we decided in the summer we usually pick an Old Testament verse, right? An Old Testament, story or something, and but we decided to do 2 Corinthians since we did first, and we get the context and all this stuff. But in between it, I'd love to take credit for it. Just so happened it ended right last week, right before Mother's Day, and so what I thought I would do is just take a Sunday and talk about this role, the role of mother. Our culture is really basically downplaying this role. I know that sounds strange, but to me, I believe it to be one of the most powerful roles there is. And you're going to find out why I believe that. And I'm going to share those things with you pretty straightforward. But it really doesn't go according to the culture. I don't know why totally. I know a little bit of it. But I don't know why that our culture wants to downplay this role or the importance of it. As we look at, but I know one part of it is that God gave us different roles, and the different roles that we step into, that we have authority, that we're over others. And to me, this one probably is one of the most, if not the most powerful role in a person's life. Now, when I say powerful role, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not good. But I can tell you this, the role of mom has huge impact. It elicits emotions from most everyone. We're talking about your mom, right? And it either you have great thoughts and memories. Your mom or dad weren't perfect, obviously, but it can also elicit very bitterness, even downright depression, right? So it never has just a neutral role. That's what makes it such a powerful thought. And so we're talking about what it means to be a believer, obviously, and have this role. It was God's role from the very beginning. And so I want to talk to you about it, right? I just want to just share with you. It's been a wonderful thing. This last semester, whatever, I don't know, 14 weeks, 15 weeks or so, I did 2 different parenting classes. And I did a class because we kept it to about 100 each. And I just wanted to do a class, to where I could take questions and I could share. One of the things I noticed was that most of this is just common sense, But our culture really wants to make you think it's a lot more complicated than it is, so that you have to depend on the experts. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? All right, well, let me tell you this. You do not need a child psychology degree to be a great mom. In fact, it'd be better if you didn't have one. All right, just being honest with you. In fact, let me just share this with you because we're going to cover a little bit of this today. All right, even parenting books. Most of them, I would just tell you to throw them in the trash, all right? Because God gave you a gift, and it's a gift of life. We just saw, if some of you that were here, we just had a whole bunch of parents up here with baby dedication. That's so cool to me. I love that part. But, I begin to think, and what that looks like is, what does it mean? What does this role mean? And the model. Guys, when it comes down to it, if you're a believer here today, God has called all of us to live a life of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. That is sacrificing ourselves for the betterment of someone else, which is what Christ did for us. That's what it means to be a believer. The more we grow in our faith in him, the more we have that. And guys, there is no greater role that is self-sacrificing than the role of mom. None. So it just makes perfect sense that our world would downplay that role, right? But there is none. There is no greater, right? And you'll see that in just a minute. But why will I tell you and I'm not saying that you can't get good advice, right, from different places, about parenting, being a mom. But I think most of it comes from just sheer common sense and God giving you the wisdom. What do you mean? Well, this is a story I like to tell on my kids, and I've told it before, but I love it. All right, when we have 4 children, right, and we had 3 kind of in a row, right, and then there was a break, right, and then we had another one. Well, the other ones were old enough to talk to, right, when Martha was expecting our 4th, right, and it was really interesting because we set them all down. Right? We set all 3 of our kids down, and I looked at them, I was trying to tell them, right? I looked at them and I said, okay, now, all right, mom's gonna have a baby, right? Mom's gonna have a baby. And it's just classic, all right? The other 3, they looked at each other, right? And then the oldest one spoke up and said, I want to go to the shower. She was 5, right? Y'all know what I'm saying? So that tells you her personality, right? All right, my son said, it better be a boy. He was tired of all the sisters, okay? And God gave him another one, so he had 3 sisters, right? But then one of my daughters, I could see her kind of just like this. And she said, how do you know you're gonna have a baby? All right, now look at me. There ain't no book that's gonna teach you how to parent all those different personalities, right? There just isn't one. Yes, there's some principles you can learn, but unless you invest yourself into knowing them, you won't know. And there ain't a book that's gonna tell you how, right? That's why, again, I'm not against books, I'm not against learning, but so much of it is just sheer time and sacrifice. Let's just be honest of what that role is. So obviously you're looking and you're saying, how do you know what it means to be a mother? Well, I have a mother, number 1. And number 2, my wife is a mother, right? And again, just the whole thought of sharing what that role is, I don't know, it's pretty incredible. So I wanted to take a Sunday because I don't want you to back up from this role. Right? Every once in a while, in our culture, you'll hear somebody say, if you're going to have children, don't let them hold you back. Right? And don't let them slow you down. Oh, well, let me tell you something. You don't need to have kids. Right? Because they are going to hold you back. And they are going to slow you down. All right? It's just a fact. Right? So, I don't know why, but I guess we've gotten to where we've lived in a culture, it's become so self-focused that why would you want to do something like that, right? The best moms and dads too are the ones who are all in. Let's just be honest. And why? Because that's what the role is. And I doubt that there's anything that elicits emotions quite like that role, right? That role of mom. So that's all I want. I just want to talk to you about it today. It's going to be a little bit different today. I'm just going to share with you a story from the scriptures, the story of Hannah, right? And Hannah was Samuel's mom, and she, like so many moms in the scriptures, she had some real struggles, right? And I want us to talk about them. So let's go ahead and jump into it. 1 Samuel chapter 1. And if you want to follow along with us, I've got an outline for you today that if you just want to write it down. But mainly, I just want to just share with you some thoughts because the main purpose I have today is to just reflect on this role. And because what I'm going to be sharing with you is definitely not politically correct. Right? But I want you to see it. Right? Now, All right, the title, obviously, the powerful role of a mom. And number one is a mother's pain, all right? This is not so much what you might be thinking, right? It's not disappointments and other things like that. But the pain that in this particular case is that she can't have children, right? Hannah cannot have children. And guys, this is a recurrent theme in the scriptures. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about it in a minute. But let's take a look at the passage. Take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 1. It says here, there was a certain man of Ramatham, Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, all right? Who was the son of Jeroam, and who was the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph. What a name, Zuph. All right? And they were an Ephrathite. Basically, that means from the hill countries, the area around in and around Bethlehem. All right, continue. All right, he had two wives. All right, one was named Hannah, and the other was Peninnah. Now, guys, we've talked about this before, but this was not God's best. Jesus himself said, Old Testament tells us, that a man leaves father, mother, cleaves to his wife, and the two become one flesh. So therefore, that's God's design, and that's the way we do it here. There's not multiple wives. I mean, we see some of it on the television shows, but by and large, that's where most of us are, and it's the way it ought to be. But that's not the way it was here. It was not God's best, but it was what was happening. And there are a lot of reasons why you don't have multiple spouses, all right? And they list several of the reasons here, all right? But that's not our goal today. But I just felt like I needed to address it so you could see it, understand it. All right, let's continue. He says, and here it is, Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, when I say that is a recurrent theme, think about it. I don't know why, but whenever God was going to do something incredible, whenever he was going to bring a real game changer into the scene, it seems like it was always this type of a birth. I don't know, it's really weird. Like Abraham and Sarah. God had promised Sarah a child, right? And then she went on into years, where it passed the time where she couldn't have children anymore. And then they did other things which, messed it up a little bit. But then God did. And it wound up being a miracle type birth. Why? Because God was telling a story, right? It was prophetic in nature. Therefore, Abraham, who God was going to start with and do a whole lot through, and through his son, it was a miracle birth, right? Of which Christ was the picture of who Christ is, right? I always talk about who Christ is, what he came to do. But a lot of these pictures are about who Christ is, right? So you have that in Abraham and Sarah, and they had Isaac. You also had it in Rachel and Leah. And that was Jacob, right? Who was later named Israel. And they're the ones who had all the children, and they became known as the 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel, right? And Leah is the one who had all the children, same like this situation. And Rachel had none. And it just was an issue. And she prayed, and then she finally had a child and named him Joseph. And I don't know that there's a greater picture of Christ in the Old Testament than Joseph. I mean, here's a guy who was born, right? Miraculously, really. And he wound up being the deliverer of his own family. I don't know, it's just incredible. Manoah's wife, right? Same situation, and she gave birth to Samson, right? In the New Testament, you have Elizabeth, right? Same situation. And she gave birth to John the Baptist. I don't know why it's a recurrent theme other than this piece. These births, these miracle type births, every one of them made huge impacts. God was setting them aside as someone that they were prayed for, right? And that God was going to do something pretty incredible. And it's the same is the story here with Hannah and Elkanah. And Samuel was going to be a game changer. You'd just come out of one of the worst eras of history for the nation of Israel, which was the Judges. Okay, if you want to read one ugly book in the Bible, I don't think there's any more violent or ugly ugly with a capital U than Judges. But God was about to change all that, and he was going to use Samuel to bring it. It's just amazing how all these, whenever God's bringing either a deliverer or a game changer, because Samson was a deliverer, right? And Abraham, and then Isaac was a great picture. These are all pictures, and that's not my point for today, but I just want you to see there's more to the story behind this than we're going to really take the time to talk about today. But today the main role is just the mom, right? All right, so let's continue, all right? Let's see. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. What Shiloh means peace. And so this was the original town. This was where the tabernacle was set up. Remember, this is long before King David. And so it was obviously long before Jerusalem became the capital. It was long before there was any temple, because Solomon built that. So they used to have this big tent, really, that was the same dimensions as the temple, but it was a tent, the one they carried around with them. And so it was kind of required once a year after they came into the promised land to go to Shiloh and to have a festival once a year. Everybody went, everybody got together, they'd do their worship, they'd do their sacrifices. It was just a cool time of the year for everybody to be a part of. And that's what was happening, right? It says, and on that day, okay, let's continue, year by year, to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. So she had a lot of children, obviously, right? But to Hannah, he would give a double portion because he loved her. The Lord had closed her womb, right? Now, problem number 2 with having multiple spouses. All right, you're going to love one more than the other. Okay? And that always causes problems, right? But here's the picture, is that Elkanah loved Hannah. But it does, the scriptures here are clear that it was God's plan for her not to have children up to this point. Does that make sense? See, that's the issue of being a believer, is that we don't always know God's plan. We don't always know why things happen the way they do. Lots of people like to stand in judgment of why things happen, right? Even those who don't believe in God like to do that. Isn't that interesting? I have found those who claim not to believe that there is a God, it's not that they don't believe that there's a God, it's that they're real angry with him. Does that make sense? But that's another message for another time. Anyway, I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, but it's not my life's goal to prove to everybody there's not one. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't do that the other ones. Y'all got free stuff. All right. So anyway, let's get back to where we were. So we have this great picture, right? We have this great picture. And so, again, let's just keep reading. He gave her he loved her. All right, here we go. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her. Okay, reason number 3. You don't have multiple spouses. Right? There's always going to be rivalry, and there's always going to be, it's not the way God intended it to be. Anyway, continue, all right? So it went on year by year, all right? As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart so sad? And then, like a lot of husbands, not all, but a lot, they try to say something that'll help. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? All right. And here's what he says, God bless him. All right. Am I not more important to you than having 10 sons? And no, it didn't really get it. It was sweet. And give him an A for effort, but, all right. And do give an A for effort, all right? But anyway, let's move on. Right. So there's a mother's pain, all right? She just wanted to be, and God had put it on her heart. And it was all a timing issue. But boy, sometimes when you're in this chapter, it's a hard one, right? When you look back, you go, wow, God was faithful. But when you're having to walk through it, it's not always that easy, right? Number 2 is a mother's prayer, right? I think it was Billy Sunday. He was one of the funnest characters of the turn of last century. He was the Billy Graham before Billy Graham came on the scene. And he was an ex-baseball player, and he was amazing. But he made a statement. He said, all hell can't tear away a son or daughter from a praying mother. And I thought, that's a pretty solid thing, you know? Our parents are never perfect, but if you had a mom, and I did, if you had a mom who prayed for you, then that's what Abraham Lincoln said, is that no man is poor who has a praying mother. And because of that incredible pictures that you have one person in your life, that's what they did. And but I want you to know that she was not praying for her children, she was praying for children. She wanted a child. Well, this is what she said. Let's read it. And after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose, and now Eli was the priest and was sitting on the seat beside the doorposts of the temple of the Lord. Actually, that temple is not a good translation there. It's the tabernacle, right? That's the tent. It was the tent because the temple wasn't built yet at this time, right? And she was distressed, deeply distressed, and she prayed to the Lord. And it says here she wept bitterly. All right, we're going to skip verse 11. We'll come back to it in just a minute. Look at verse 12. And as she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth, right? Hannah was speaking in her heart, but only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli mistook her for being drunk. Well, this tells us a lot about something. Either Eli, God bless him, he's so far off track that you've got a woman here who's truly heartbroken and praying, and he doesn't have enough discernment to distinguish between if she's drunk or not, which kind of shows you the times. Guys, these were the times of the judges, the ugly times. Or it probably also said that this had happened a lot before. People come to the temple drunk, right? And so Eli was just fed up with it. Again, we don't know which it is, but it just shows how ugly the times were. And Hannah really is kind of a bright light in an ugly time in the history of Israel. All right, let's continue to read. Eli said to her, "How long are you going to keep being drunk? Put away your wine from you." And Hannah answered, "No, my Lord, I'm a woman who's troubled in spirit. I haven't drunk any wine or strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord." In other words, that's where that term "pouring out my soul," pouring out who I am. Lord, this is something you've put on my heart, and why is it there so strongly? All right. So do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. And then Eli answered, "Go in peace. And the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor," which is the Old Testament word for grace, "in your eyes." And then the woman went her way, and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. There's something about prayer. There's something about the uses and understanding. There is great mystery in prayer that I don't totally understand, all of it. But I do know that it works. I don't know how it works, but I know it works. And I know that God does those things. And so much is that after she walked away from this, she was convinced that God was going to grant her request. I don't know how all that happened, but that's what happened. And so you have then that God's is going to give her a child. And then number 3 is a mother's promise. And this was also part of her prayer, this promise that was part of her prayer. And she wanted children, but she also didn't want them just selfishly. If I wasn't trying to line up all the P's, letter P's, I would say here a mother's desire. I cannot tell you how important this one is. A mother's desire. Look at verse 11. It says, but if you will give your servant a son, I'm going to give him to the Lord. I want him, Lord, to know you and to serve you. It says here that no razor shall touch his head. That is, his hair will never be cut. A lot of people don't realize that in the Old Testament, that's a Nazirite vow. And it was a specific vow. We're all to be committed believers, if you are a believer today. But a Nazirite vow was one that was a little bit extra for the time, right? Samson was a Nazirite vow. Obviously, it never cut his hair. So Samuel was going to be the same thing. And this was her desire, right? This is what she wanted. And guys, let me tell you something. It is a powerful thing. You see, moms are there from the beginning. Moms have impact that even you don't realize that they have from your mother. Why? Because they took care of you, they corrected you, they urged you, they encouraged you at times you don't even remember, right? And therefore, the role of mom is a powerful, powerful role. And the desire for your children, what is it that you want for them, right? Because that finds its way into them. I'm not saying that's always going to be the way, but that's why from the very beginning, all right, from the time you're the youngest, right, and the littlest, they're taking care of you, they're doing all those things. And when a mom selflessly does those things, it just leaves a bond that follows you the rest of your life. And why is our culture trying to minimize that role? Because all of us knows it's to be the truth. But you do understand that political correctness is rarely correct. Does anybody understand what I'm saying? So therefore, moms, dads, don't fall into this trap, right? Because I'm here to tell you, it is a powerful one. So let me tell you, what's important, moms. What's important is the desires you have for your children. And in reality, it's not so much what you say, it's who you are. And we'll talk a lot about that at the very end. But let me just bring this up to desires. What is it you want for them? Well, I want them to succeed. And in my parenting class, I'm going to do another one in the fall just because I had so many interested. Guys, you got to remember, we live in a culture where, let me tell you this, if you follow what the politically correct parenting thing, you will frustrate yourself and you will be miserable. That's why most of it's common sense. It's not easy, but it is. It's common. It's not complicated. And everybody wants to make it complicated. It is not complicated, right? But back to the desire. All right? When it comes down to it, Hannah's desire for her child was for that child to follow the Lord. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to follow the Lord, but is that what you want? Is that truly what you want? Because your desires, at least in the beginning, are going to take over. It's an amazing thing when you think of it, right? Like, it's an amazing thing to me. I had a mom tell me one time, not here, although I hear this all the time. I had a mom, kid looks at me and says, well, kid was growing up in, I don't know, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, whatever. This is classic. This is absolute classic. I want you to hear this, right? I want you to see how this works. And mom said to me, well, I didn't want to force them to go to church, right? Because I didn't want them growing up with a bad attitude about going to church. I said, oh, I understand. Perfect. All right, let me ask you a question. I said, when your kid gets to 4th, 5th grade and they say, well, I don't want to go to school, what do you say? Well, they have to go. I said, why? And she let it slip out of her mouth before she realized. You know what she said? Because it's important. What's important to you is going to come out no matter what you might say with your mouth. Am I making sense? Therefore, do I want them to be this? Do I want them to be that? Well, and there's nothing wrong with having lots of goals, right? Lots of things. Hey, I'd love them to do this. But what's the priority, right? Scripture talks about seeking first the kingdom, right? But I want you to know, moms, you have far more, right? You have far more impact than you realize. And I don't know why, but when we don't have the time, and when we don't spend the time, we lose that impact. Isn't that interesting? I just want you to hear it. It's just interesting stuff. We know it to be the truth, but I just want you to hear the culture in which you live, right? All right, so number 3 is a mother's desire, really, mother's promise, right? Number 4 is a mother's protection. All right, this is interesting, right? I don't know if you've ever been around, right? It's an amazing thing. If you've ever been around a mom, right? It's fierce. The protective nature of a mom is absolutely fierce. And it's an incredible thing. But she took the time, all right? Hannah did. And let's look in verse 19. They rose early in the morning and they worshiped the Lord, and they went back to their house in Ramah, right? And Elkanah knew his wife. That means they had sexual relations, and she conceived, right? And the Lord remembered her, and in due time she conceived and bore a son. She called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. Now, Samuel, right? A very popular name today in our culture because of this very story. The word El, all right, El, is a Hebrew word just for God. Just the generic name God. Yahweh, Jehovah, that's Yahweh, that's the personal name, right? I am that I am. But just God, right, is El. So anything that ends in El or begins in El is God, right? So Samuel means I asked him from God, or God gave him to me. So that's what Samuel means, right? And so we have a feminine variety of that, right? Samantha, all those kind of things. And so this is where the word comes from, right? Rachel, obviously. Bethel, the word bet, B-E-T-H, in Hebrew means house. So Bethel means what? God's house, or house of God. So again, you see, this is where the name came from. All right, and then what happened was a man, all right, this man, Elkanah, all right, he and all his house, they went up to offer for the yearly sacrifice like they normally did. And Hannah didn't go. You have to remember, this was the most popular trip of the year. This is kind of like going to harvest time at the county fair, right? But it was national. And it was something that everybody loved to do, but she knew her time was limited. And that she was going to basically give up anything she wanted to do to be able to be there for Samuel. Well, let's just read it, all right? But she didn't go, right? And she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I'll bring him up so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. And Elkanah, her husband, says, you do what you think's best. Wait until you have weaned him, and only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Therefore, she had him the first 6-7 years until he could actually take care of himself. But those were the times, it's at those times when it seems like it just is a constant giving thing, right? It's a constant need thing, right? She weaned him. She took him up along with a 3-year-old bull and an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord. And they're at Shiloh, and the child was young. And they made the sacrifice of the bull, and they brought the child to Eli, and he served there from the time he was a child. Now, here's what I want you to see. She had him all through the early times. And this is what I want you to know the most of. Guys, it's not glamorous. It is just not glamorous, right? Raising little kids is not glamorous, right? But it is powerful, right? What do you mean it's not glamorous? Well, there's noses and diapers and tantrums but let me tell you this, I look on those things. Since being a believer in Christ is all about sacrifice, it's all about self-sacrifice. We learned that in 1 Corinthians 13, remember we talked about? And when somebody has loved you like that, that's why mama has such a strong role. If she's been who she's supposed to be. That's why mama has such a strong role in your life. Because she was there at the time when you were the most needy, and she met every one of them. Does that make sense? Therefore, you always make impacts on people that you serve sacrificially. That's what it means to be a believer in Christ. So when you do that for children, it impacts them always, right? If you think they're a bother or a nuisance or they're holding you back, they pick up on that. Are you hearing me? I don't know why our world says that this role is not that important anymore. You ought to go after something more important. I see it as the most important. It's like, I like that statement, right? The hand that rocks the cradle, right? And why would I say that? Just simply because I don't know that there's any greater impact in a person's life. Because it's at those times, right? You do those things. And you earn the right to direct and to guide, right? Which is what Hannah did. I remember, it was so interesting, in all those days when, again, I've told you stories, we had these 3 kids, and then the younger one came along, and it was interesting. In fact, she's actually here. She's home from college, and so we've told this story before, but she was different than the other 3, and she just didn't sleep. And but the first 3 that we had, here's what I want you to hear. First 3 that we had, 6 to 8 weeks they were sleeping through the night, right? And then this other one came along who had different ideas, and 11 months, right? So I thought I was going to lose my wife to a psych ward because she had 3 little ones who kept her up all day, and she had an infant that kept her up a good chunk of the night. So I don't know that there's anything that's more maddening than lack of sleep, right? But see, that's a mom is there at those times. And you say, well, they don't remember it. Oh, I think they do. I think the biggest impact on Samuel's life was his mother. And by the time he was 7 or 8 years old, he was already serving, right? Because that's what she'd promised. I don't know. I see things differently. And most of the time it's the exact opposite of what our world thinks. But I see it as you have an opportunity to have an absolute amazing impact. And it's who he's called us to be, and it's what he's called us to do. But anyway, so, she didn't sleep through the night for a long time. And another thing I always like to say, this is just for free. You wouldn't believe how much advice people gave us for how we were doing it wrong. Right? Listen, if we hadn't had 3 already that we had done it on, we may have listened to you. Be real careful. Look at me. Look. Be real careful how you criticize young moms. Right? Help. Encourage. All right? Don't doubt. Because if the last one had been the first one, number 1, that'd probably been the only kid we had. But number 2, we would have probably fallen prey to everybody's advice and go running all over the place, doing weird stuff, cutting up herbs and all the stuff in the room. I have no idea, all right? But I learned, right? I learned really quickly on, you're going to see it in just a minute. Anybody who has all the answers, never listen to them, right? Never listen to them. Because this parenting thing doesn't fit in a box, right? Number next. Thank you. All right, a mother's prize. And I just used the word prize. Better word is reward, but I was trying to keep the letter P thing going there, right? But either way you look at it, this chapter 2, verse 1 it's Hannah's praise to the Lord for answering her prayer, right? And believe it or not, it's kind of prophetic. We don't have time to talk to you about it. I just don't. But I believe Mary, Jesus, right? Jesus, who had Jesus. I believe she knew this by heart. Because when she does her Magnificat, if y'all familiar with that, when she did her praise, it's almost identical to Hannah's. Interesting, huh? So again, you have this picture. You have the reality in who Christ is, what he came to do, but who Christ is, and these other pictures in the Old Testament, and this happens to be one. So that's about all I can tell you about it now, because I want to get to some of the other things. But let's take a look at Hannah prayed. It was really a praise, and she said, "My heart exults." I like the old way it was translated, like it was translated in Luke. "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my horn is exalted in the Lord." That didn't mean that Hannah had a horn. All right, that was a saying at the time. You filled a horn; it was part of a container, right? And usually, what it usually meant was gladness or joy, right? So basically, she says, "My joy is exalted in the Lord," right? My horn, that is, which is joy. All right, "My mouth derides my enemies, but I rejoice in your salvation." You hear Mary say this when she repeats it, and this salvation, because it was what Samuel was going to do as a picture, but it was what Jesus did in reality. It's just a neat thing. There is none holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you, and there is no rock like our God. You see, the thing that I want you to see about Mary, about Hannah, is that she had a rock-solid relationship with the Lord. You don't have words like that if you don't know who he is. And so it's who she was, right? The rock obviously represents the foundation. Christ was called the rock, so there's lots of other stuff going on here. I don't have time to talk to you about it. But here's what I want to share with you. It's about Hannah here. And in verse 3, talk no more very proudly. That's why I told you earlier, if anybody says they have all the answers, don't listen to them. Pride always messes people up. And they sound confident, but in the end, anybody who is a proud parrot, that is, lives and goes by pride, they're in for trouble. Let me give you an illustration. Right? My kid will never, oh yeah? Oh yeah? I tried never to say never. Think about that one for a minute. And why? Because, I don't know, just something about an arrogance is right before it all falls apart, right? I think that's what she's talking about here. Talk no more very proudly, and let not arrogance even come out of your mouth. But she had a rock-solid relationship with God, and God's the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed as the rest of it. And I'm going to finish there, but let me share with you this. This is where I'll close, moms. And really, dads, this is all of us who are parents. You know, when I did the classes, I wanted those who were parents, I wanted those to realize it's a whole lot more important who you are than what you do. Always remember that. Therefore, work on who you are. You can train anybody to do something. But see, God says it's much more important the why you do it as opposed to what you do. So when you start asking the question why, it all has to do with what's in here, right? Because you can even screw up, but if you have the right motive, eventually you're going to get it right. It's all about here. So I want you to see that it was who Hannah was. And guys, that is what's most important. Wisdom is what you need the most. You know, you don't need psychology books. Number one, you need to know that kid. And the only way you're going to know that kid is if you have time to know that kid. So that when something happens, you can address it. Or you know how to encourage them. It's like I told you, all four of our kids, I only mentioned three, and the fourth was just as different from the other three as they were different. And you have to know who they are. And let me tell you what, mama just has an antenna to know that. Right? If you take the time to do it. So in reality, you wind up having a PhD in the personality of your kids if you take the time to invest. That's why ain't nobody can do that like mom can do that. But it's who you are. And it may not seem very glamorous. Well, the world may tell you it's not glamorous, but again, we got to stop listening to them anyway. right? Because to me, there is no more powerful role than that one. Wisdom. Who you are as opposed to what you want to do. You see, your kids are going to know you as, that's a little scary too. Your kids are going to know you as well as you know them. You know, whenever we try to do the right thing, but that's not who we are, you know what you get labeled? A hypocrite. That is when you're trying to enforce something or you're trying to do something that's not really who you are. Does that make sense? But when it's because of who you are, it makes you genuine. I could go on and on and on, right? That's what I always like to say about my own children. If you ask any of my children, you know, about me or Martha, they'll tell you real fast that we weren't perfect. All right, real fast, which is fine, all right? But the one thing they will tell you is that I wasn't Martha. We're not phonies, right? We're not trying to teach something, do as I say, but not as I do. We're just not trying to do that, right? Why? Because it doesn't work. But wisdom, right? You see, there's it's called parenting by faith. This is where I'll close. I love this whole thought of parenting by faith, being a mom of faith. What does that do? What do you mean? How, you know, put some feet to that. What does that mean? Well, what do you depend on, right? You know, I know, like being the pastor, there's a one verse that I wear out more than any other in all of the Bible. It's found in Proverbs, and it says this. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't lean to your own understanding. Oh, so what you need to know comes from outside of you. Is that what that says? But most people say, well, just go with your heart and go with your gut. That can be dangerous at times. Depends on what's governing your gut. Does that make sense? So don't lean to your own understanding, but in all your ways, what? Acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. Moms and dads, I use that all the time. Lord, I do not know what to do here. I cannot get my kid to understand this. What can I do? I wouldn't say it out loud, but I would just acknowledge him. In other words, Lord, I don't want to do what I want to do. Lord, I want you to do. And it's amazing. He's promised to make my way straight if I acknowledge him along the way. As your pastor, I do that all the time. I'd love to tell all of you I've got all the answers. I just don't, right? But every time I have to make a decision or everything like that, I always say, Lord, I acknowledge you here. Why? Because I'm trusting him. Because the scripture says, any who need wisdom, right? All you have to do is what? Ask for it. That's it. All you have to do is ask. So, one thing that seems to be common among mamas is fearfulness. And I think it's probably one of the most normal emotions a mama has. You ought to have it, by the way. Your kids have got to live in this world, right? But fear can paralyze you, and fear can cause you to make a lot of bad decisions. So how do you combat fear? Scripture says you trust the Lord, right? And learn to trust him. Parenting by faith is huge. I've got to be done. But guys, I just want to do something on this Mother's Day. Number one, to encourage moms in the room. And don't let anyone diminish the importance of your role. Nobody, right? And then finally, just to wish all of you a happy Mother's Day, all right? God bless you. God bless you.